because at least 10 times my data has been exposed in my life. So it's sadly commonplace. So watch your credit. But we do have a mandate in terms of if we are doing any kind of payment processing, we do need to follow what is required and set out by the PCI Council. Towards that end, there are various types of assessments that we can do. And this largely depends on where you fall as a merchant. So if you are a level 1, you will be required to do a report of compliance. And this is the whole shebang, basically. You're going to end up with like a 300-page report at the end of this stating what you've got in place. Now, level 1, these are businesses with over 6 million card transactions a year. Okay, so think your big global companies on this, your hotel chains, airlines, cruise lines, Walmart, Costco. These are your big guys. Then when we get down to level 2 through 4, then we get down, level 2 is 1 million to 6 million, and then we break it down further for level 3 and 4. But those, you can do a self-assessment questionnaire, which is our SAQs. And as you can see, there's various, and I got a second slide on this too, because we have a number of SAQs to choose from depending upon what exactly you do, because it breaks it down. And it gets really easy if you've outsourced everything to third-party providers. So say you're setting up a small kiosk, you're taking some credit card payments, but you utilize one of the providers, say like Square or something, so someone else is doing all the actual processing. And you have an encrypted capability for that. It goes straight to their servers, you don't save anything. You're going to do an SAQA and have a much easier time when the auditors come through, if you choose to do that. Because the SAQA is a self-attestation. You get to go through and do that yourself. Caveat, you may want to have someone with PCI experience walking you through it your first time. And typically, if you don't have to have like the full PCI package, to do a gap assessment and have a QSA walk through it with you so that you know exactly what it is that's being asked. Because just like any other regulation, a lot of people end up, looking at like, what exactly am I supposed to do? And I will say PCI is very prescriptive. It does say what you need to do versus, if you're working with a NIST CSF, where it can be organizationally defined time period for various things. So with that, as we're thinking about our audit, we obviously have 3 key phases. Pre-audit, where you do preparation, and really this should be occurring year-round, because you want to make sure that you're in compliance. So if you do an update to something, you're changing systems out, you want to make sure that you've got everything hardened, patched, up to date. You're doing all your reoccurring activities, such as account audits, making sure you don't have dormant accounts that are hanging around past your expected time frame. And also keep that line of communication open with your QSA. Hey, we're not here to make your life hard. We're here to make sure that you're secure. Some of us tell jokes too. And of course, after the audit, if there have been any gaps that are found, work on closing those out so that you can go back to your acquiring bank and be like, hey, we're all good. Don't find me. So now we'll step into the strategies. Now, as I mentioned, preparation is a very essential part of this. And a core part is doing your scoping properly, because this year, now technically we're in 4.0.1. I'm just going to say 4.0 for ease. But with PCI 4, we are now shifting where scope documentation is on the merchant themselves. So When I come in as a QSA, I am validating and confirming what you have documented as far as where your PCI data is held, where that touches and flows through. And it's also required that this be updated on an annual basis. I would say if you have any changes to data flow, data storage, whatever you're doing with the data in general, take a look at your scope and make sure that it hasn't changed. Because if you do have a major change to your environment, much like anything else, you do kind of need to go back through an assessment. Along with your scoping, if you can segment your PCI section, so say you've got an online merchant and obviously you have a web front end, you're doing payment processing, maybe sending directly to Bank of America or whoever, and they're doing that. If you're not retaining anything besides tokenized data, and you can segment that all off so that this isn't going through your whole corporate environment, it is going to save you time and money because it's a lot less systems that have to get a pen test done on, which can be pricey. It's a lot less time that I have to validate what systems are in scope, and also go through with all the documentation that is requested of you, security audit logs and how your controls are set up. Because, even though we do sampling in a larger environment, especially when you have expanded scope, because of that data transmission, it can greatly extend the time. Time, cost, and more time for an auditor to potentially find more things wrong. So obviously documentation plays a huge part of this, right? Please make sure it's up to date. All your policies should be reviewed on an annual basis. And that can be one of the biggest items I have found across every single compliance, to be honest, is making sure that policies are, one, that they exist, and two, that they are reviewed and maintained for what is applicable. Because some things could change. Password policies over time have changed. It used to be 8 characters. Now everyone's going to 16. So making sure that things are up to date is kind of key. Also, roles and responsibilities. Those 12 requirements that I showed you guys, you have to have roles and responsibilities documented for each of those. That is another net new for PCI 4. So, and this doesn't have to be, you don't have to list out who it is. This is simply as, okay, we got our security administrator, system administrator, whoever is responsible for various things, and you can tie that back to what you have documented with human resources as far as the general role. But having those duties and the roles documented is key. Also, once you have gone through a PCI audit, documenting what your process was, where you went and got your documentation, having a repeatable process will greatly help you in the following years, and especially if that role that is supporting your auditor to get that data out, if that changes. Because if the person gets reassigned to something else, they've moved to another role, maybe they've left the organization, all that knowledge has gone, and now, now the QSA gets to go through it with someone else and be like, hey, I need these screenshots, this, and this, and we've got a laundry list. And as I mentioned, gap analysis, highly recommended first time you're going through. If you have a major change in your architecture, you may want to also have a sanity check just to make sure. And if you've got, if you're doing like a 3-year program with a QSA firm, that's one of those things where you can be like, hey, I want to make sure we're still on the right path because we're doing these changes, and can we just have like an hour consultation between our security architect and your auditor. Because we will absolutely look at things and say if we need to go through and do another assessment. Now, your team is always a core part because I'm not going to get all the answers strictly out of whoever the compliance point of contact is, unless you have a small team and they are everything, which I've worked with that too. But if we're talking on a larger scale, then we've got various system administrators, database administrators. HR also gets an interview. We have a variety of individuals that we touch on going through a PCI audit. So making sure that all these roles are aware, and this is one of those things once you do go through it the first time, you kind of know who you need to schedule ahead of time when it's coming up. But including some training on PCI along the way, it is required as part of security awareness training. Especially there is requirement for PCI specific on those that are doing any handling of credit card data, whether it's, say a gas station attendant or one of your database administrators with having tokenization data saved in your databases. So there's a variety of individuals that all this touches on. Testing, always a good thing. Also, another requirement, to do your own risk assessment annually. This is always a good recommendation anyway. And if you have internal audit, that's great. A lot of places, internal audit and IT tends to have a very adversarial relationship. So maybe getting them to come around to more of a purple team point of view, where it's not, hey, we're not trying to show that you're doing bad things, because that's always the target on my back, right, as an auditor. It's like, I'm not trying to say that you guys suck at something. I'm just pointing out areas where it needs improvement, and you can then go and say, hey, give me more money. Because, point of the matter is, we all need more money because we either need more people because our client base has grown and we don't have enough people to support all the incidents, all the problems, and everything else that's cropping up, or more money in terms of, well, we need more stuff going in AWS, we need a new firewall, this one's kind of busted, and there's a variety of things. And once again, I'm not here to point out flaws. I'm here to point out we have a gap and there are ways we can improve it. You just don't have the right tools. So going through that internally, and especially I say this for things where you can fix it during the course of an audit, because there are some things in PCI that you can fix. If you haven't reviewed your policies, for example, go get your CISO or whoever to go review that document and update it and sign it. It may take an act of God, but you can schedule them a little interview session with me and I'll tell them you're going to fail if you don't. That tends to help at times, but I'll do it politely. So including that, but also looking at your incident response. It's amazing sometimes, it's like lack of testing on incident response. Now, depending on your environment, you may have plenty of live action that you don't really need to have an incident response tabletop. But in those cases, you've got people that are clicking on phishing links and you got malware events. Make sure you have an after action report. I can use that as a live test because you guys went through it. Just, do a debrief and be like, okay, here's how we can do it better. Here's what we learned. And I kind of touched on this the whole way through. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to help you get through this. And if we find some things, We're going to set up a plan of action, and we're going to set some prioritizations based on what PCI says should be prioritized. And that's not like hard and fast. They give a suggested prioritization, but you may have a different one based upon your business needs. And we just flow with that, and then we have that wrote up. We go to your merchant bank, your acquiring bank, and be like, hey, here's the issue. They may or may not decide there's going to be fines involved. They may set a time frame. You've got 6 months to fix it. This is one of those, it depends, because it really depends. And that's stuff that's totally out of your QSA's control, but we can provide input as far as whether it's a really big issue or not. Because a lot of times it's just these little things that it's like, you can't fix it in a week. And sometimes that happens. If you've got a third party that something got updated and now something doesn't work because of it, because what software plays well together? So, in these cases, it's one of those, here's the problem, here's the potential risk, and when it's low, it's usually, one of those, okay, here's your time frame, let's circle back and make sure you've got this cleared out. And common pitfalls. So I talked about some, but a lot of these come down to, hey, we're good. No, we're good enough to pass, but there's always more we can do. Because, again, doesn't matter what compliance you're going through, there is always more. Bad guys will find a way. Scope management, always the biggest thing. This is where having a full inventory, hardware, software, comes into play. Really important. Because then also, when you've got your pen test going on and it's like, oh, well, we found some other stuff that is not listed in the inventory. Where are we seeing these? Is this a whole nother network? And then they start poking around. So yeah, it's not just the QSA that pokes around, it's the pen test team too. So you got two sides of the coin here. But because they will make sure that your segmentation is actually functional, because that's key. Scope is key on anything and everything. And if you think it's big on this, if you're going to end up doing some CMMC stuff, it's really important there. Because that's going to be even more expensive. That's new DoD stuff. New. Neglecting documentation. Everything I have mentioned devolves into documentation. Policies, procedures, the stuff needs to exist, the stuff needs to be refreshed, it needs to be reviewed. And if you're doing things that you are supposed to do, such as you're doing your account review, you're doing your firewall rule review, there also needs to be a document, just meeting notes basically. Hey, we did our firewall review, here's who attended, even if it's just one person. And what was done. All firewall rules are needed at this time, didn't remove, no changes made, good to go. It doesn't have to be a novel. It just needs to document what was done as proof that this has been done on its mandatory reoccurring basis. Yeah.
So on pitfall 1, a slight version shift of that is we've passed ISO, we've passed something else, so we're always fine. Does that come up in a lot of in your practice of people who have in a very regulated environment? They passed a lot of other things, and so they naturally just assume that their documents are going to be good enough for PCI DSS, or is that something that because it's really kind of more to the financial world, it doesn't really have a lot of overlap into other regulations?
No, I've seen it like pretty much across everything, because even SOC 2, some places have gone for SOC 2s, and it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily cover you for everything PCI asks, because there's a lot of, we have a lot of controls in this. So there's a lot of boxes to check.
And it's
Literal.
A little twist, right? A little different
Yep.
than what it would be for something else.
Yeah, just those little unique individualisms between the various things, while we all do come from that same baseline of all the best practices. And I mean, you can crosswalk everything. I don't care what compliance you're looking at. You can go back to a NIST document and you can find a solid control question for it. And if you don't do anything else, go through the NIST CSF, you'll have a nice baseline. And, it lends to everything else. But there's always the little things that it's like, okay, I need an extra document, or 5, or 50. And also third parties. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that gets, outsourced, whether it's, having your payment processing, in this case, directly done by, something like Square or some other processor. Also, even things like MSPs, you've got a lot of stuff that is outsourced to MSPs. The other half I do the consulting side, but I also work for an MSP. So that's part of it. And you do have things that are outsourced, but what's their security level? You got to make sure that you're doing, and this is another 4.0 required, reassess your third-party vendors on an annual basis. What's the risk that they're bringing in to your environment? Is that acceptable? Has it changed? Let's go back many years, and I'm showing my age here, but Anthem, I was helping out with third-party risk at that point, and one of the things was, well, the company is renewing with Anthem. What's their current cybersecurity insurance policy at? That was the main thing to continue on with the company I was at the time, keeping Anthem as their healthcare provider instead of switching up. So, you can have additional threats introduced to your environment from all kinds of angles. So, things to think about. Who are you doing work with? And then step into post-audit best practices. As I said, this is continuous. Think of this as a living, breathing document for everything that you've got, because everything changes. It's just like making sure you got the latest, greatest patches up. There's something new. So making sure that you're keeping updated and you're looking at, what flaws, what gaps might be introduced if we make a change. Bake that security in if you're going to do an architectural change somewhere in your environment. And look at what's upcoming. Are there new changes? Even things like, okay, what systems do I have that's coming up on end of life? Because another requirement is, well, we're not doing that whole limp along after end of life on all of our hardware software. It's like, no. We need to have supported stuff. We need to make sure we have some kind of warranty program in place and something that we can depend on so that it's not just, well, I'm going to see what I can get on eBay to fix this. It don't work anymore. So, things to, have on the horizon for what's coming up, what do I need to prepare for, and, also maybe schedule your major changes so that it's like right before an audit comes through versus right after, and then you got to go through it again. I've had clients like that too. So planning is important. Obviously, some things can't always be planned for due to timing, funding, and everything else in a business. But where you can, it'll save you seeing me twice in a 6-month period. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just an expensive thing. So, with that, we're going to open it up to questions.
So can you talk more about cyber auditing, what it is, and how to balance that with the compliance side?
Okay, so the difference between the audit and the compliance side. So for me as an auditor, I'm coming in as a third party and I'm assessing and validating what controls you have in place, and that can be against whatever regulation it is that you need. On the compliance side for the company, now it's kind of a broad scope because you've got a lot of people that will take part of that. Typically, you're going to have someone that gets to act as your compliance officer. Now, that could be someone that's in legal, or you could, if we're looking more cyber focused, it could be jointly between legal and an IT manager, security, CISO, what have you. It's really company dependent. But you'll have technical as well as legal representation typically looking at it. And with that, then there's all the underlying, having your security administrators, making sure they've got everything locked down in terms of access, authentication, and whatnot for, accounts and identity. But then also in terms of hardening the systems with like the system administrators, database admins, and yeah, there's a whole host more, including human resources, because we look at the physical side as well, including doing physical walkthrough of buildings, make sure there's CCTV where appropriate, badging, as well as locked network cabinets and the like. So it really takes in the whole picture. Does that help? Or
Thanks, yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, do you actually help the company remediate their findings, or you just offer suggestions and just have them take care of the findings?
So that's one of those where if I'm going to audit it, I can't fix it because I can't audit my own work. So I could have someone else come in. It's like I also do vCISO work for other companies that I'm not auditing. So, have that trade-off within the team where one person will be the vCISO, come in, help them, give them the guidance they need, help them get their security controls in place, and then someone else audits it. So it's segregation of duty, yeah. But I do that too. Yep.
So what effect would you say is all these kind of novel payment systems having on this, like the Zills and the Zooms and the Cash apps? To me, a lot of them feel like their competitive advantage over Visa and MasterCard is that they claim they don't need to follow all these regulations, and they can kind of, look, we're using something totally new, it's all very different, and so we don't really need to follow things like PCI DSS. But it looks to me like they actually kind of do. I'm interested in your opinion on that.
Yeah, because if you're doing say you're doing a cash app where you're transferring cash between people, or you're doing a debit card, that doesn't necessarily fall under PCI. But now if you've got like a MasterCard stamped debit card, yeah, you're going to be having PCI coming along because it's still associated with the brand and they're going to require it. But yeah, yeah.
It just seems like they're fudging it. So, at least to me, it's like, yeah, okay, sure, you're Venmoing money. And because you're Venmoing, it doesn't have a MasterCard or a Visa on it, so congratulations. PCI DSS doesn't apply to you. But something should apply to making sure that you're still, compliant with something.
Yeah, and aside from the New York financial stuff, there's not a lot that really targets fintech. We should, just because it's just moving money around. It's one of those gray areas.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Are there any pathways you suggest for getting into this kind of cybersecurity?
To do audit or to do, In general, if you've got a technical background, that's really great because one of the worst, well, not the worst things, but it's like you've got someone that just kind of got thrown into it because they came from accounting. Not saying accountants are bad. They're also great at this because they're very like, I'm going to make sure I check everything here. I'm checking it all. But sometimes then they need those of us that spent time as a system administrator, help desk, what have you beforehand, to be like, okay, no, the pen test is fine. Don't worry about that. That's low. They closed out their criticals. We're good. So, it's kind of a blend. But having a technical background absolutely helps because you can get in there and you can look at stuff a lot quicker, so to speak, without needing additional team members to guide you through it once you're starting. Aside from that, being willing to look at a lot of regulatory language. I just kind of fell into it myself. Like I started out as a Linux system administrator. I went through my first audit, and like 2 years later, I utilized that and my technical background to move into an auditor position. Based on it's like I've gone through it from the other side. I know how to apply the controls, so I can certainly test the controls. Was the approach I took.
Are there any certifications that you're looking for?
Oh, there's a ton of certifications
Just
to start with. CompTIA, Security Plus is like the total start. It gives you a good baseline, helps you get past those HR filters. But then there's also the CYSA Plus. I'm spelling it out because we've got too many CISAs at this point. We got that. We got the CISA, that's the certification. We got CISA, that was Homeland Security. So just to confuse us. But yeah, there's a ton that are out there. Yeah.
You said that you went from systems to like an audit role. Was that like an ISA or a QSA?
Well, no, that was like ISA because I was doing federal contracting.
Because ISA is internal, right, within the company.
Oh no, within PCI that wasn't PCI. That was government work.
Oh, okay. Got it.
No, I was going around as a DISA contractor, running DISA stigs on Unix systems everywhere. Fun stuff.
Very sort of fun stuff.
Anyone else?
Two questions. First one is, where's a good reference for policies and procedures
In general?
in general? Because we got dinged on that, and I know it's not comprehensive, and I really don't have a lot of people who want to read this besides me. So it'd be nice to have other better documents to
SANS does have some white papers on that.
say.
Yeah, they've got a nice white paper repository on a whole lot of things, actually. And yeah, I mean, and you can also utilize like NIST guidance for some of your baselines if you want to like fine tune things towards specifics, because they've got special publications on everything. They make the guidelines for everything, weights, measures, and everything.
Awesome. I'm into both of those. Second question is, we had an assessment, but they did not do a physical walkthrough. So in anticipation of that happening, where should we start looking so we can be prepared for any dings on the physical?
The biggest thing is security of systems, security of the building itself, badging locks and CCTV at entry points. If it's like payment systems, making sure those are over where credit cards are taken. Like you walk into a gas station, there's like 3 above the register. So things like that, and especially visitor logs, making sure that visitors are signed in and out and appropriately escorted.
I would highlight escorted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that any room with, you know, like your networking cables and stuff like that, that those also have locks on them. Yeah.
With the introduction of PCI 4.0 or 4.0, whatever, what should large organizations really be looking for? Like, we're already working with our normal auditor, but should there be anything that I could expect to be thrown at me? We're mid-audit right now, which is why.
I don't think so. I mean, you know, it's been in that slow phase in for a bit now. And yeah, just finally hit that drop deadline. So it's really just what's there and making sure that it's implemented. So yeah.
No drift is the hard part. Thank you.
Okay. Guess we're done. Thank you, everybody.
Great job.
Thank you.